We just finished unboxing the brand new iPad Air 5th generation not too long ago. If you haven't seen that video, you're definitely going to want to check out that unboxing. Video link down in the description below. But today we're going to answer a really big question. Should you upgrade to the 5th generation from the 4th generation? Or if you don't yet have an iPad and this is your first time diving in, should you just pick up the iPad Air 4th gen? That's because currently on Amazon you can find the 4th generation for a hair over $500 and even under $500 for a renewed model. So in this video we're going to highlight each and every new feature comparing the brand new 5th generation iPad to its predecessor, the 4th generation iPad. You're really not going to want to miss this one, so without further ado, let's go ahead and roll that intro. Alright, so I don't want to waste much time. I want to dive right into it since we already covered mostly everything that we needed to know in the unboxing. So, from the exterior, as you can see, both of them have the same chassis. They have the same body, and dimension-wise, nothing has changed. So on the back, we still have our very shiny aluminum. Shout out to Apple. This blue color is just really dope. I truly enjoy this color a lot. But everything is the same. We still have our camera right here at the top left, our microphone, and you might be able to see a difference in these two, but this is because this one, the Gen 4, the green one, is a cellular model, and this one is not, and that's what these antenna bands here are at the top and bottom. So disregarding that, everything else is the same. Interestingly, and I noted this on the review, the only real big change that I noticed from the back is ironically just this font right here, that on the previous one it just said iPad, and now on the new Gen 5 it now says iPad Air, so quite intriguing. And now flipping both over, we can now see that they still sport that same 10.9-inch gorgeous liquid retina display, and really nothing else has changed aside from our top camera here. And if you look really closely, you can see that one sensor is a lot bigger, and don't worry, we'll go over that a little bit more in detail in just a bit. And just to show you a couple of Apple's first party accessories, yes, they are all still compatible on the Gen 5. So we have the Apple Pencil 2 here that attaches magnetically here to the side just like I did before, and there it is, it's paired and it's ready to use. Also, we have the smart keyboard that is also compatible on the 11-inch iPad Pro. So just like before, we just attach it right here magnetically. It's going to click on, and the keyboard doesn't need any batteries because it uses the smart connector here on the back, and we are ready to rock and roll. So now we can use the smart keyboard here to start typing. Let's say I'm in class, and we're taking finals, and I can just take a bit of some quick notes like that. So the accessories still work, the Apple Pencil 2 and the smart keyboard. Oh, before we go into some camera testing and also some performance testing, I did want to note that while everything still appears the same here on the bottom, the new Gen 5 actually sports a better USB-C port that delivers up to 10 gigabits per second instead of 5 here on the Gen 4. So what this means is that let's say that you're a photographer and you're importing photos directly from your SD card. That just means that the USB-C port found on the new Gen 5 should import your pictures in theory at least twice as fast, since this one is running at 10 gigabits per second and this one at 5. Also, if we take a closer look here at the top, once again disregarding the antenna bands on the cellular model, we still have our Touch ID sensor that is used here to unlock the device. Now, it's under my assumption that this Touch ID sensor is on the same standard as this one. They both unlock extremely fast. And of course, also here on the top, you can also see our array of speaker grills or speaker holes. But the only thing is that still on the Gen 4, it's not the same as the 11-inch Pro, meaning that this still sports a dual speaker system and not a quad speaker system like on the iPad Pro. On the 11-inch iPad Pro, your two firing speakers will fire in this direction and also downward in this direction since it's a quad speaker design, but not on here. However, I'm not too sure if the speakers have been changed. Typically on the iPad Air, it has pretty decent speakers with subpar bass, I would say, but for its size and its thickness, it does the job just well. So why don't we just go ahead and hop into a quick speaker test to see if there's any differences.
Jack it up.
All right, I also wanted to brush up on each respective starting price on both of these. So the Gen 5 right now for $599 gives you 64 gigabytes of base storage. Now on the Gen 4, when it was initially released, it was also $599, and it also came in a base storage of 64 gigabytes, which I personally don't think is enough, especially with this being the perfect middle ground between the budget iPad and then the Pro models. It would have been nice if Apple would have included a base 128 gigabyte option. While that is wishful thinking, they don't even have a 128 gigabyte option. So if you want to jump up in storage, you have to go straight from the 64 gigabyte up to the 256 gigabyte straight from Apple. And by then you're already treading dangerously close into 11-inch iPad Pro territory. So at that point, it's just like, which do you get? But if you are considering the base storage, once again on Amazon, the Gen 4 base 64 gigabyte runs a little bit over $500. Those prices are fluctuating, but if you do want to save a little bit of money, specifically when it comes to both of these having the same storage, then it appears that the Gen 4 is a better value, but there's more to it than just the SSD. So let's go over into some more differences now. Something that did not change, as I mentioned, is our back camera. This is still the same 12 megapixel sensor as before, and it takes somewhat decent shots. With software optimization and software updates, they are essentially the same camera, at least hardware-wise. And so even then, I don't know how many people go out and take pictures, especially on the back camera on their iPads. People will get offended very easily if you make fun of them, but people, in my opinion, do look pretty goofy. It looks like they're taking pictures with a frying pan or something. So while I may not use my iPad for cameras, at least for those wondering, you'll know that the back camera is still the same, so there's no improvements there. However, where we will see improvements is on the front-facing sensor. So previously on the Gen 4, this sported a measly FaceTime HD camera that took 7 megapixel photos. Now it gets upgraded to an ultra-wide sensor at 12 megapixels. This means that your selfie game is really going to be boosted up by quite a bit. That's a whole 5 megapixels. So that means that your images are going to become a lot more crisper and clearer, especially while on video. The FaceTime HD camera was notorious for looking like a potato was recording when on a FaceTime call. So now FaceTime calls should be a little more fluid and a lot more crisper. Additionally, if you go ahead and open the front camera, switch over to the front-facing camera, you will notice right away that the new Gen 5 sensor is actually zoomed out just a little bit. So if you can tell, guys, right there, the previous Gen 4 sensor is zoomed in just a little bit by a hair. So you should be able to tell the differences right here. But the cool thing about the Gen 5 is that if you press this little button over here to the left, you now get this view. So once again, because of that ultra-wide sensor, it's able to capture much more of what's in the background. And thankfully for me, the background happens to be my beautiful band wall. If you guys haven't seen my band wall yet, head over to my TikTok and my socials, as I'm constantly posting updates about the channel and of course of the band wall. As you can see, I probably have just a few more rows to go there. So hoping to fill that in very, very soon. And that's not it. There's also some software improvements found on the Gen 5 that are not present on the Gen 4. Namely, what I'm referring to is Center Stage. Center Stage is that very cool feature that follows you around to a certain degree while on a FaceTime call, a Zoom call, or Skype, or whatever, any kind of those applications. And it's a really neat feature. So it has a decent angle of articulation that the camera can kind of sense you. After a certain point though, it'll just kind of give up and it won't be able to capture you. But it's still pretty nice. So if you were to happen to move to the left, the camera sensor will also follow your face so that you're always within frame. I think it's a really nice feature and I love using it when I'm on FaceTime with my girlfriend. And now the moment you guys have been waiting for, the highlight feature of the new Gen 5 is the inclusion of the M1 chip. A vast upgrade from the prior A14 chip. But that's not to say that the A14 chip is any slouch. This on its own is already a very powerful tablet, and yet Apple just had to come in with the M1 and just laugh and scoff at the predecessor. So we're gonna go in right now on some quick testing, but before that, as you guys can see our processor, we have the Apple A14 Bionic, and over here we have Apple's ARM chip, their own proprietary build, clocked in at 3.20 gigahertz versus 2.99 gigahertz on the prior model. And another significant upgrade is that the Gen 5 now sports double the RAM, or memory as some of you guys might refer to it. Over on the Gen 4, we only have 4 gigabytes of RAM, whereas now over here on the Gen 5, it was essentially doubled, clocking in near 8 gigabytes, or at least what it's reading here is 7.45, but it's, same thing. All right, so now without further ado, we're gonna go ahead and run some CPU benchmarks and let's see how each performs. All right, guys, and after running a quick Geekbench test, we arrive at the following results. So as you can see, over on single core score, on the Gen 4, it scored a pretty decent score of 1600, but the Gen 5 bests it still, coming in at 1721, equating to about a 7% improvement in terms of single core. Now, single core dictates those kind of activities that you perform on your iPad that don't require multiple cores. And what that means is basically your everyday tasks like opening up YouTube, if you have to jot down some notes on the Notes application, whereas multi-core is more for those applications that require a ton of power. Think iMovie or Adobe Photoshop or Lightroom. Those kind of applications do benefit from an increase in score over on multi-core, which the Gen 4 came in with a multi-core score of 4276, whereas the Gen 5, a monstrosity, comes in at 7226 thanks to that powerful M1 chip. That equates to about a 65% improvement when it's related to the multi-core score. And now going kind of hand in hand over with the multi-core, we also want to test the graphical computing power of both of these. Now, while iPads aren't the go-to device for gaming, some of us will inevitably want to game on our iPads. And it's nice to know that our iPads have a ton of graphical horsepower. Now, of course, these iPads are not meant to rival anything like a gaming laptop. There are hardware and there are devices out there that are specifically made for gaming. Historically, Apple's devices, including the MacBooks and Macs, are a no-go when it comes to gaming. So while most of us aren't going to use our iPads for gaming, it's nice to know that there's still some horsepower under the hood. So on our Gen 4 using the Metal test within Geekbench, the Gen 4 scored a Metal score of 12,656. However, the Gen 5 almost doubles that with a score of 21,237. Once again, just showcasing the power of the M1. But just like I mentioned in my unboxing, I always ask myself, the iPad's operating system, iPadOS, is its biggest limiting factor. So while the M1 is cool to have in the Gen 5 Air, a lot of that isn't being used, and that's because of the limitations of the software. I've always said, once Apple takes Pro seriously is when they will have a full desktop version of Final Cut Pro on the iPads. It will most likely be an iPad Pro exclusive. I don't know if they would ever allow Final Cut Pro to be on the Air or budget lines, but it's anyone's guess. I guess we just have to wait and see. So while Geekbench Metal test is a decent tool, we need both confirmation and reassurance. So another application that I really like is the GFX Benchmark test, which what it does is basically simulating a video game, and then at the very end it lets you know how many drop frames, if any, were there, and also the average frames per second. So this is version 5.0.2. It's the same on both, and we've selected the same test, so we're gonna go ahead and start running them and see if there is any difference in graphical horsepower. Alright guys, this is the Aztec Runes test, and just by glancing at it, what I can tell, at least from my view, is that there are a few more drop frames on the Gen 4. It's a lot crisper and smoother here on the Gen 5. It may be a little hard to tell by camera, but trust me, it is a lot smoother here on the Gen 5. And for those that do like to use their iPads for gaming, if you had to choose between the Gen 4 or the Gen 5, you'll definitely want to go for the Gen 5, especially for those games that are a little more graphically intensive. We're going to let the rest of this test play out, and then we'll come back and look at the results. Alright, so what do we have here? Let's look at the results from both of them. Across the board, the Gen 5 was pretty consistent with most of the tests running at an average of 60 FPS, which is good. If we were up there in the 120 FPS, that would be a lot better, but still, for an iPad, this isn't bad. But as you can see here on the Gen 4, some of these frames are a bit lower. If we compare the Aztec Ruins, we got 60 FPS on the Gen 5. On the Gen 4, we have 37 FPS, which, like I told you guys, it was dropping a few frames. Over on the Car Chase, 48 frames per second. The Manhattan one was closer to 60. It was at 58 frames per second as well. And then the T-Rex, the easiest of the tests, was also up there very close with 60 FPS, pretty much in line with the Gen 5 on the T-Rex test. But once again, the T-Rex one is the easiest one in terms of graphical overload. Am I saying that right? All right, so needless to say, graphics on the Gen 5 are gonna look a lot better thanks to that M1 chip. But we still need even more reassurance. There's just one more test I want to show you guys, and this has to do with 3D modeling and 3D rendering. Some would say that the iPads are no device to do any kind of 3D models or renders, but many people forget that tons of applications actually are using some of that 3D architecture, sometimes even crossing over into AR. So what this test does is it aims to replicate that. All right, here it is, 3D Mark. So we're gonna go ahead and start the test on both of them, and we'll see how it goes. We'll look at these results. Now, I've done this test before, and both of these iPads do get pretty hot. They get hot around over here on the right-hand side. I don't know why, I'm not too sure. My channel doesn't do any teardowns. If anyone has any idea of why the right side gets a little hotter, just drop that comment down below. But right away, I mean, you can tell that this, between the GFX test, these graphics are way more intense. And currently, this one is holding up at about 30 frames per second. And by this one, I mean the Gen 5. The Gen 5 is holding up at an average of a hair above 30. Here we are fluctuating between 34 and what appears to be 37 frames per second. Whereas the Gen 4 is lagging behind. It's hovering right now, bouncing from around 16 to 17 frames per second. From the eye, it's really apparent that the Gen 5 is way smoother with these 3D renders versus the Gen 4. But we'll wait until the end to look at the official results. Ladies and gents, here it is. So what I like about this application is it gives you an overall score as well as the average frame rate. So on the 2020 Gen 4 iPad Air, it got an overall score of 2486, which again isn't anything to brag about, but also isn't down there with the wimpier levels. This is actually somewhere in the middle. The Gen 5 M1 had an overall score of 4,748, once again almost doubling that. Part of that does have to do with the increase in RAM. So the increase in RAM on a year-over-year upgrade to double is really good. That extra RAM is going to allow you to suspend your applications for much longer and allow you to open more of them up at the same time, all while multitasking and still running a lot more smoothly. So if you are a big multitasker, let's say you go over there and take notes while also watching Netflix or Hulu or whatever in picture, while maybe using the Apple Pencil over on some photography, switching from app to app, then the Gen 5 is definitely going to be your pick. But if you're not doing any of that, if you're doing just your basic tasks like Microsoft Word or taking notes at school or even just single task applications at once, then the Gen 4 should do you just enough. But the average frame rate on the Gen 4 in this test is a measly 15 frames per second, which is pretty bad. I'm not gonna lie, that's not too good. But on the Gen 5, it increases to nearly double once again to 28.4 frames per second. So in terms of graphical performance and just raw horsepower, the Gen 5 is where it's at. And guys, almost wrapping up the video, there is one last difference that I see a lot of other reviewers missing or just entirely skipping over, and that's that the new Gen 5 now supports true 5G, not just the sub 6 gigahertz 5G found in the Gen 4. This one now also supports the true millimeter wave 5G, which for those that do carry around their iPad and use it essentially as a laptop and who have a cell phone plan, then this one, hands down, is the one to go since the 5G speeds on this are going to be a lot faster. And so guys, those are all the differences found on the new Gen 5 iPad. What do you guys think? Really, at least in my opinion, on the surface, this is your general S upgrade. They really should start adding the S moniker to some of these upgrades because we're not totally getting a lot new here. There are always going to be small improvements that always entice buyers to go ahead and upgrade. But my biggest pet peeve is the starting capacity at 64 gigabytes, which honestly in 2022, like I said, is just not enough. And the worst part, they add insult to injury by having your only other option be 256 gigabytes. So at that point, you have to fork over another $150 on top of the already pricey $600 you're already forking over. And that's not even including the Apple Pencil or the stinking very expensive keyboard either. So what are my thoughts? Listen, the thing is, I would love to recommend the M1 iPad to everyone. And while it is the perfect middle ground for most people, this is the iPad in between Apple's whole lineup that's right smack in the middle. But at $600, it is pricey for a lot of people. And on top of that, it's only 64 gigabytes. So my recommendation would be this. Because of the limitations of the operating system on the iPad, unless you are a photographer, a video editor, you're a music producer, really anything that has to do with multi-core applications, then I would say go ahead and skip the Gen 5 because the Gen 4 with the A14 chip is gonna do you just fine. If you are a student and you're planning on using it for school, this will get you through school, I promise you, very easily. And on top of that, the A14 is such a recent chip that this Gen 4 iPad will have support for years and years to come. Like I said, if you are any kind of content creator, whether that's a TikTok creator, whether you use a lot of video editing programs, if you do photography, then this is most likely going to be your guy. Not only is it faster internally, but also the USB-C port is going to be tremendously useful for those that are needing faster speeds from that. But once again, all in all, if you're upgrading, please don't. There's really no need to upgrade. If you already have the Gen 4, there's very little to offer over here on the Gen 5. You do get double the RAM, the ultra wide sensor now on the front camera, and the M1 chip, and that's basically the gist of what you're getting over here on the Gen 5. Now, if this is your very first time jumping into the iPad Airs and you can't decide, I would highly recommend using my Amazon link down below and getting this one for a hair over $500, essentially netting you savings of, about $100 or so. And just because I'm a math nerd, I mean, with $100 savings from a $600 iPad, let's say that's about 16.6, so about 17% in savings by using my link down below. I've laid out all the facts. I've hopefully shown you guys everything that you need to know about these iPad Airs, and hopefully you can make a more informed decision. One thing I ask of you guys before I leave, please drop a like on this video, as that allows the YouTube algorithm to pick this video up and broadcast it to more eyes, specifically those people who are on the fence. Stay tuned because I purposely didn't brush up on battery, and that's because I will be constructing my infamous battery drain test now featuring the new M1 iPad Air. So those do take a while. I know you guys are very anxious to see it. Don't worry, it's going to be uploaded probably about a week to a week and a half after the upload of this video. I still have the SE to cover, as well as upload some videos over on my stock channel that's brand new and I just started a couple months ago. So guys, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you'd like to see more head-to-head comparison videos just like this, where I'm right in front of the camera, just drop a comment down below. Let me know. Either way, I love bringing you guys this informative content. And with all that being said, I can't wait to catch you all in the next video.